to share your screen or
Hello, yeah, sure.
okay. Welcome again to the session on Scrum 101 Learn the Basics. We will be jumping into Scrum and learn the basics of Scrum and how you can get started with it. So we have John Albert with us today to walk us through the basics and understand Scrum better. So let us hear from him. Over to you. You're on mute.
Yep. Hello. Yeah. So thank you, Surag, for that warm welcome. So I'm just so glad to be with here for today's session. So I know we have a different time zones, right? So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. So I know that you're all excited for today's topic, but before that, let me ask you a question. Who among you have already heard the word Scrum, or basically have an idea or familiar with the Scrum? You may kindly please give your reaction via the thumbs up button on the Microsoft Teams so that I'll know. All right, that's cool. That's good to know that there are some of you that are already familiar with Scrum, and I guess they are here to learn more about the technicalities and the high level information about the Scrum. Okay, so by the way, I would like to have this session as an interactive one. So maybe I'm going to ask questions along the way, but at the end of the session, I have prepared a knowledge check. Anyway, it's just 5 questions, a simple and very easy questions, and I hope your participation on that as well. All right. So without further ado, let's kick off our today's presentation. So I'm already sharing my screen, and I hope it's visible to you. All right. So for today's session, I'm going to talk about the Scrum 101, learn the basics. So for today's agenda, we have here the first one, which is what is Scrum. So we're going to tackle the definition, the theories, and the values that entails on the Scrum. And then we also have the Scrum application, wherein we're going to determine who can use this Scrum and where to use Scrum. And then the third one, we're going to discuss about the Scrum components, the Scrum team, the Scrum artifacts, and the Scrum events. And then the fourth agenda is that we're going to have a simulation. We're going to have to determine what's inside the sprint, how the sprint looks like. And then finally, the fifth agenda, we're going to have how to succeed with Scrum. So we're going to tackle about the references, the training materials, and the certifications that you might be interested in later on. So yeah, so that's the agenda. All right. So let's begin for the first agenda, which is what is Scrum. So we're going to have the definition, the theories, and the values that entails Scrum. All right. So what is Scrum? So this definition was I've got this definition on the 2020 Scrum Guide, which is like the Scrum Bible or the main reference that we use in implementing Scrum. So we have here the definition. Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. So we have here the three highlighted keywords, which is lightweight framework, generate value, and adaptive solutions. So let's digest this definition a bit for everyone's understanding. So for the first keyword, we have here lightweight framework. So when we say that Scrum is a lightweight framework, it just means that it is simple. So rather than providing everyone a detailed step-by-step guide on how to execute their task on a daily basis, the Scrum framework focuses more on the people and their interactions with each other in order to provide something of value. The next keyword that we have is generate value. So Scrum framework is actually a subset of the Agile methodology. And through this, it teaches us to regularly inspect and reflect to what our goal is. So apart from always reflecting on where we are at in terms of uh, the deliverables that we have, it also engages us to constantly review our processes internally within the team so that we can increase efficiency and deliver quality solutions. All right. And then finally, we have the last keyword, which is adaptive solutions. So this just means that Scrum acknowledges that we don't have the answers to whatever we are delivering at the beginning, but it recognizes that as we go through time, as we go through the different iterations, we learn more about our product. And the Scrum is flexible enough to handle those changing requirements and varying priorities. So that's what Scrum is. So let's now move on to the different theories and values behind Scrum. So we have here the Scrum theory. So if we imagine Scrum as a house, so we can say that it is founded on two things. So which are they? We have empiricism and lean thinking. So when we say empiricism, this is actually making decisions, making the calls, making the shots based on the observations. So acting on the fact base, the event based, the experience based, and the evidence based manner. On the other hand, we also have the lean thinking. So, what does it mean? So, it enables us to generate value in our processes without the need for any other unnecessary work. So, we only do what is needed so that we can eliminate the waste. All right, so these are the two foundations for the Scrum theory. Of course, we cannot put up or build up a house without the three pillars, right? So we have here the three pillars, which are transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So when we say transparency, meaning that apart from the work that we are doing, all the processes that we have within the Scrum team should be visible, not just only to those who are working, but also to those who are receiving the work. So yeah, that's the transparency, being transparent. The next one, inspection. So when we say inspection, all the work that we are doing must always be ready for inspection or review. And the inspection must be and review must be made regularly so that we will be able to see the risk. We will be able to see the unwanted variances ahead of time so that we can address those as soon as possible that and as soon as they happen. All right. So yeah, it is very important to have your stories, your task, or your work be updated on a timely manner so that it is ready for inspection. And then finally, we have the adaptation. So whenever implementing Scrum, we should always be ready to adapt to changes in the requirements, changes into the plan, and be able to act accordingly. So that's how you adapt. Okay. So these are just some of the terminologies that we used for now, but later on you will see how these theory and values would make sense when we integrate those into the different components of Scrum. All right, so let's proceed on the different Scrum values. So we have here five different Scrum values that were embedded on the Scrum framework. So the first one, we have the courage, which means doing the right thing and working on tough problems. We also have the focus. So whenever we are in a Scrum team, everyone is focused on the sprint and the goals that the team have as a whole. And then we are committed. We have this commitment in achieving the goals that we have set as a unit and as a Scrum team. And of course, we also have the respect. We have the respect for each other, that respect to be capable, equally independent individuals. And then The last one, we are open. We are open just not just within the team, but also we are open to our stakeholders as well, and about all the work that we are doing and all the challenges that we encountered along the way. All right. So these are the five Scrum values. So again, the Scrum theory were based on the empiricism and lean thinking. And the three pillars are the transparency, inspection, and adaptation. While we have the Scrum values, which are the courage, the focus, commitment, respect, and openness. All right. So let's go through the second part of our presentation. We have here who, when, or where can we apply the Scrum? All right. So let's go back a little bit on the definition that we presented earlier. So as we say, we have the Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problem. So we have here the highlighted phrase, which is to generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. So usually when you hear Scrum, it is highly tied with the software development projects, right? But it is not limited to that area alone. You can use Scrum in different aspects as long as the problem is complex and that your deliverable can be scheduled in a short intervals, which we call the iterations. So meaning you can broken down and plan in short iterations. So if you have those criterias, then Scrum is probably for you. So let's take for example. So we can use these Scrum in different human resources services. So let's say for instance, I need to massively hire hundreds of people in a span of 6 months. So that type of activity would require you to regularly review where you are at and to see areas wherein you can improve. Or if there's something lacking, so we can use it on that one as well. So similarly, you can use also Scrum in events organizing. So whether in the office or personally, so you can use Scrum. It's actually one of the examples that we will be using later on. So you better watch out for that one. And then you can also use Scrum. Maybe when you want to go for a vacation, you can list all those items that you are needed for to plan a vacation, like you're going to find a destination, booking of flights, requesting your annual leave to your employer, um, searching for a hotel, renting a car. So that stuff, those things can be put up into a list, and then you can use Scrum on that approach. Okay, so always remember that even though you mostly hear Scrum to used in software development teams and areas, it can be used in many, many more areas, not just specific for the software development. All right. So that's the Scrum application. We'll now move on the third part, which are the Scrum components. So we have here three components: the Scrum team, the Scrum artifacts, and the Scrum events. So for the Scrum team, we have three key important areas, which are the product owner, the Scrum master, and the developers. For the Scrum artifacts, we have the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. And then the Scrum events, we have actually four. We have the sprint planning, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. Okay, so let's now start talking about the people, the Scrum team. So we have it here on the next slide. So we have product owner, the Scrum master, and the developers for the Scrum team. So we can envision the Scrum team as the fundamental unit of Scrum. Similarly, on how the family is the basic unit of the society, right? So we have here the Scrum team. So within the Scrum team, there are three characteristics. So we have no subteams or hierarchies, meaning it is expected that the Scrum team functions as one and as a whole unit. So all of the Scrum team individuals are all equal. So there's no subteams. And then the next one, cross-functional, meaning that they should be cross-functional, meaning they all have the skills that is needed to be able to turn an idea into something of value or to an increment. So they should be cross-functional. And then the next one, we have self-managing, which means they can internally make decisions on their own. Also, they are self-organized, so they can manage all their work that were given to them. Not just their work, but also they can manage to have uh, the Scrum events to be held on their own. And then the last one, um, it is encouraged to have the Scrum team that would compose of around 10 or fewer people. So why it is encouraged? So just an advice, because based from observations, they have noticed that a smaller team tend to be more productive, and that the communication is easier if you keep to manage as a small team for the Scrum. That's why if I really have to have a big Scrum team, it is advisable to split them into different Scrum teams. So it would be complicated. Okay, so let's go in depth for that one. So let's see what are the roles that are entailed to these roles. Okay, so let's tackle first the product owner. So just like what the name implies, the product owner owning the product. So anything that is about the product is the responsibility of the product owner, which will include answering the questions that is related to the product or the service that the Scrum team is doing or providing, developing and explicitly communicating the product goal. So we're going to discuss about the product goal later. So it is important for the product owner to relay all the clarifications and discussions about the product to the product team. And then lastly, we have the creation, communication, and ordering of the product backlog items. So the product backlog items is one of the Scrum artifacts, but we will discuss it later. But for a high level overview, when we say the product backlog, it's basically the list of the things that you need to do for a certain sprint. I mean, for a certain product. All right, so let's move on. Let's have the Scrum Master. So next to the product owner, we have the Scrum Master role. So if I find an analogy to this one, it's like he or she is like the coach of a basketball team. So similar to that function, the Scrum Master coaches the team on how they are able to do their work based on the Scrum framework. And to do that, the Scrum Master ensures that all the Scrum events take place and then they are positive, productive, and are kept within the time box. And then to keep also the focus of the team as they are doing the tasks that are required for a given iteration, they also help to remove any blockers or impediments that can hinder the team's progress on their work. And then finally, we have the developers. So the developers create the plan for the sprint, which is called the sprint backlog. They also make sure that whatever they are doing is of excellent quality by adhering to an agreed definition of done. So they are responsible for adapting their plan on a daily basis to make sure that they reach the goal for a certain iteration and they hold accountable as professionals. So just a little note on this one. So you can see developers, just because the name is developer doesn't really mean that they should be developing something or is an expert in code development. So the role developer could mean that a certain team would have a different skill set and not just really developing as per se. Let's say, for instance, in the software development area, we have the developers that we have here composes of the business analyst, the testers, the data scientists, and the developers. So it's not merely the developers as we can see it here. All right, they are called as a whole as a developer. Okay, and then yeah, so again, on the Scrum team, we have these three different roles, which are the product owner, the Scrum master, and the developers. All right, so I hope you're still with me so far. Can you give me a thumbs up button so that I know that you're still with me? All right, thank you. Thank you for that one. So let's proceed now on the succeeding part. So now that we have the Scrum team, let's go through the Scrum artifacts. So we have here the three Scrum artifacts, which are the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. So this entails to a shippable software. Okay. So next slide. So the Scrum artifacts are made so that we have materials that we can use to inspect the progress that we have throughout the sprint. And each of these artifacts would have a corresponding commitment, which would reinforce empiricism and helps us to provide more information that will keep the team focused on their work. So let's start first on the product backlog. So we have here on the slide. So just like what I've mentioned earlier, when you're talking about the responsibilities of the product owner, the product backlog is a list of what's needed for us to improve on our product. So if a team would look for a single source of truth, all the requirements that they need to work on, they'll definitely look at this artifact. And that given that the Scrum is adaptive, it is also expected that the product backlog is dynamic. Okay. So as we learn more about the product, we can discover the need to change some requirements, and also we also change the product backlog when when we meet those. So the corresponding commitment for this one is the product goal. The product goal is the future state of the product, which can serve as a target for the Scrum team to plan against. So now for this one, let's use some examples so that you can better understand how the product backlog is. So let's say, for example, I wanted to build a house. So ultimately, my goal, my product goal is to build a house. And for me to build a house, what do you think are the different list of items that I need to have in order for me to have that house? So for instance, I need to have what? I need to have a living room. I need to have a bedroom, a kitchen, a dining room, and also a bathroom. So all of those are needed for me to have a complete house, right? But for now, let's hold on those examples. So let's proceed now for the sprint backlog. All right, so for the sprint backlog, the sprint backlog is actually the subset of the product backlog. So we'll choose which items from the product backlog will be worked on for the given sprint. So it will compose the sprint goal or the smaller goal that we are targeting. Uh, what are the backlog items that we select for this sprint and how we deliver them? So if the product backlog has the product goal as the commitment, then for the sprint backlog, we have the sprint goal as its commitment. So the sprint goal this is the single objective for the sprint. So given that the product backlog items that we have earlier, which are the living room, the bedroom, the dining room, kitchen, bathroom, etc. For example, so based from those lists from the product backlog, I've decided that we're going to work on for the living room first. So based from the list, we chose to have the living room as the priority for this certain sprint. So from that one, we have that one as the sprint goal. And then we have the increment. So when we say increment, this is a concrete stepping stone towards the product goal. So what value have we provided for a sprint? That's our increment that would have. So we need to make sure that all that we need to make sure also that each increment when combined and added would work all together. So we have here the commitment as the definition of done for the increment. So it's a formal description of the state of the increment when it meets the quality measures required of the product. So going back to the example that we have earlier, so our goal earlier was to create a living room, right? So our definition of done may be, so for this increment, so maybe I can say that the living room was already complete when I can see that we have a tiled floor, or there should be a double coat painting on the wall. So things like that. So for you to be able to say that it's completed, you can see all of those criteria as well. All right. So, and if I was able to complete that living room, then the living room part of the house would then be part of my increment. Now, for example, for the second sprint, so it will be happening, right? So my living room was already done, and I've decided that I will work on the next one, which is the bathroom. So the bathroom would then be the next sprint goal. So assuming that I have completed it, so my increment then would be not just the living room, but also the combination of the living room and the bathroom. Okay, so that's how the increment works, how it looks like. So we're going to have another example later on, so we can add more figures on that so you can appreciate it. But for now, yeah, that these are the three artifacts: the product backlog, which have the product goal, the sprint backlog that have the sprint goal, and then the increment for the definition of done. All right, so let's move on. So I have here the Scrum events. So here is the figure of the sprint. So let's go through the different Scrum events, or as what we call the Scrum ceremonies. So the events and ceremonies provide formal opportunities for us to be able to apply the pillars that we've mentioned earlier, which are the transparency, the inspection, and adaptation. So let's start. So this is how the sprint looks like. This is how the cycle looks like. But first, let's discuss what is the sprint. So I've been mentioning sprint and iteration a few times earlier, but let's give a formal definition for this one. So for the sprint, it is not a formal event, but it is a container for all the different Scrum events that we have. So sprint are usually fixed in length of 1 month or less to create consistency. So it just depends on your team on how long would you want your sprint. So some may have it in 2 weeks and some may have it in 3 weeks, but it is advised that if you decide to have your sprint go for 2 weeks, then it should be consistently going for 2 weeks moving forward, not 2 weeks for today and then 3 weeks for the next, and then 1 month and then go back again to the 2 weeks. So that shouldn't be the case. So it is advised to have a consistent length of the sprint, and then we're going to have it fixed to create consistency. And also, it's tailor fit to the product or service that you are doing. So again, The sprint is not a formal event, but it's just a container for all the ceremonies that's happening within it. So let's start now for the first formal Scrum event, which is the sprint planning. So for the sprint planning, it actually kicks off the sprint by initiating and laying out the work to be performed for the sprint. So this is the very first Scrum event that we have. So we've seen earlier the three artifacts, right? The product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. So whenever we choose items from the product backlog and we create a sprint backlog out of it, it happens during the sprint planning session. So by the end of the sprint planning, it should be clear to everyone that what are the work that we are doing, and then why are we doing this work for this specific sprint and how we will do it. So basically, the work should be ready and should be planned during this session. So the sprint planning is usually time boxed to a maximum of 8 hours for a 1 month sprint. But for a smaller sprint, it should be shorter or less. So the reason why we are time boxing these events is to keep the focus of the team and make sure that the time allotted for a certain ceremony will be focused on the meeting on meeting the objective of that event. So now that we are done with the sprint planning, we have identified the sprint backlog or the list of items that we need to do. Then the implementation is now currently happening. And throughout the implementation, we have what we call as the daily scrum or the daily stand up. So we have it here, the second scrum event. So the daily scrum provides a formal opportunity to inspect the progress towards the sprint goal. So only developers are required to attend the daily scrum event, but the product owner and the scrum master are just an optional. They can attend or join the meeting and listen as well, but they are not mandatory to attend. Okay, so it's a time box of a maximum of 15 minutes, regardless of the sprint length. It may be 1 month or 2 weeks, but it is fixed for the daily scrum. It is fixed for a 15 minutes meeting. So for this one, it's time for the team to let others know how far they are in terms of their task or the stories that are given to them. And it's also an avenue for them to raise any blockers or impediments that they might have. So there's no strict format for how we conduct this daily scrum. However, there are three usual questions that we are answering in conducting the daily scrum, which are what did you do yesterday, what will you do today, and the most important one, what are your blockers or impediments that are encountered for you to complete your task. So actually, that's the most important question. What are your impediments so that the team can help you to remove that blocker for you to proceed on your story or work. Okay, so after the implementation phase, and that we have already completed the duration of the sprint and the sprint is almost done, we'll now proceed to the next event, which is the sprint review. Okay, so the sprint review is unique in the sense that it is the Scrum ceremony or the Scrum event wherein you can invite your key stakeholders to participate. So stakeholders meaning your customers, the other teams, the clients that you have. So here on the Scrum event, sprint review, you're going to conduct that review with them. So during the sprint review event, so you're going to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. So the Scrum team usually presents what they have accomplished to the product owner and the key stakeholders here to get their review and their feedback, or that if there's needed something to change about the product. So it's already covered here in this ceremony. So it's time boxed to a maximum of 4 hours for a 1 month sprint. But again, for shorter sprints, the time box can be smaller. So just a note on this one, we shouldn't limit the sprint review into merely a presentation or a demo with the developers presenting something and then getting their approval. So it should be treated like a kind of a working session. And for any changes in the backlog, it should be implemented as a result of the sprint review. All right. And then finally, to conclude the sprint, we have the sprint retrospective meeting. So as the sprint retrospective meeting closes the sprint by planning ways to increase the quality and effectiveness, not just for the product, but for the Scrum team as a whole. So personally, this is my most favorite Scrum ceremony based from the four. The retrospective is my favorite one because this is the perfect place to kind of like release all your creative juices, as there are a lot of materials available online for you to spice up and be creative about your retrospective. So creativity is crucial here because you need to really get input and feedback from your team on how you can do better the next sprints. So for me, based from experience, I'm doing icebreakers before the start of the sprint retrospective meeting, so that I can get their attention, and then I'm setting the environment which will be more comfortable for the team, and then for them to be transparent on how they can give their input along the way when we conduct the sprint retrospective meeting. So it shouldn't be a like of a serious one, but it's more of an engaging one instead. So all right, so for the sprint retrospective, usually it is time boxed to a maximum of 3 hours for a 1 month sprint, but again, it will be lesser for a smaller sprint. The usual pattern is finding out what we did well, what can we improve, and coming up with the actionable items so that you can apply it to the succeeding sprints. All right. So after that one, so the cycle goes back again to the sprint planning for the next sprint. Okay. So again, we have the four different Scrum events. We have the sprint planning, which initiates the work to be done. The daily Scrum, wherein we inspect where we are towards our goal of the sprint. And then the sprint review, wherein we inspect the outcome of the sprint. And lastly, the sprint retrospective, wherein we sit down and plan for the ways on how we improve the quality and effectiveness. Okay, for the next slide, I have here a tabular form wherein I already summarize all those four Scrum events and included the sprint as the container. So we have here what specific time box for each of the Scrum events, who are the required attendees for those Scrum events, who are the optional attendants, what are the purpose of these Scrum events, what are the needed inputs and outputs, as well as the Scrum team, what are their roles on these specific Scrum ceremonies. So yeah, you may take a snapshot on this slide so you will have a reference. Okay. So yeah, that's all for the Scrum events. Let's now proceed on the um, fourth agenda, which are the simulation part. So let's take a look what's inside the sprint. So how the sprint looks like. So we will be having some of the figures so that you can better understand. All right, so we have a lot of new terms, right? So given that we have already covered the Scrum team, the Scrum artifacts, the Scrum events, so let's use the simulation example to see how all those will tie together. So for these time relation purposes, I still have my Scrum team. So we have here the 5 people here, the product owner, the Scrum master, and the developers. So the diagram here will show how the sprint looks like. So it all starts with the product backlog, wherein we have all the list of items that I have for my product. So the product backlog is the input for the sprint planning. All right. So after that one, we're going to come up with a subset of all the things that we would like to work for the next sprint, and that is the sprint backlog. So once we have the sprint backlog, we can start the implementation. We have it here. So the sprint happens, and throughout the sprint, we conduct the daily scrum, wherein we inspect the progress. So once the sprint is done, we have something of value, which we call the increment. And then the increment will then undergo the sprint review. So if ever in the sprint review there are feedback or there are improvement points that I need to integrate, I can put it back to the product backlog. And yeah, once the sprint review is done, we can conduct the sprint retrospective and then go back to the planning sessions again for the next sprint. So that's the cycle and that's how it works. Okay, so now let's provide an example for this one. So let's use something that might be familiar to a lot or might be you might have been attended before. So for this one, for these example purposes, let's assume that we have a sprint length of 2 weeks or 10 working days. I have the Scrum team that is composed of a product owner, a Scrum master, and 3 developers. And then the product that we are trying to do is organizing one of the client's wedding, which is planned for June 1, 2024. And as of the speaking, the product backlog items so far are as follows. So we have here the 6 items, which are ordered in priority. These are based on ordered based on the priority. So we have the first priority, finding a church, and then finding an events place, setting the budget, getting all the legal requirements ready, completing all the guest list, and finalizing the list of other suppliers. So this is our product backlog. So we have it already in place. So let's put a checkbox on the product backlog because we already have it here. All right. So for the day one, so since we already have the product backlog, what's the first step that we're going to do? We have the sprint planning. So that's day one of our sprint. So during the day one, the sprint planning takes place wherein we lay out the work to be performed for this sprint. So upon agreement within the team and assuming that the discussions has taken place, we have said that, okay, for this sprint, we're going to work on these 3 items, which is finding the church, finding an events place, and then setting the wedding budget. So it doesn't necessarily mean that when I go to the sprint planning, I only have those chosen the top ones, but instead it depends on the consensus between the product owner, the scrum master, and the developers. So depending on the priority and considering the capacity. So for this example, we have chosen the first 3. All right, so let's move on. So we already completed the sprint planning. We have the sprint backlog. So let's have the day 2 to 8. Okay, so the sprint planning is done. I already have my sprint backlog here, which comprises of just the 3. So since it's already clear to me now what needs to be done from day 2 to 8, the sprint is now ongoing. So during those days, the scrum is conducted again to inspect the progress of where we are at on the 3 items that we committed for this sprint. So during the sprint, the developers would work on the items assigned to them and make sure that they adhere to the definition of done. The Scrum Master helps the team keep focus and removes any impediments that the team may face, and then the product owner should be able to answer any questions from the team regarding to the product. So that what happens between day 2 to 8. Okay, so let's now go on to the day 9. So we're going to put a check for the daily scrum and the sprint. So okay, so we have here for the day 9. So this will show the team's progress. They were able to complete the first one, um, the first item based on the priority. So they were able to find a church, right? And then they were able to find an events placed. So that's the item for the item number 2. However, for the item number 3, it wasn't completed yet, which is the setting of the wedding budget. Maybe because there are some reasons, like maybe the dress of the entourage is not yet included on the budget, so something like that. So during the sprint review, they take into consideration the product increment and inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. So the developers would present what has been done. So these are the list. So we have the Scrum Master. So the Scrum Master would facilitate the discussion, and then the product owner may make adjustment to the backlog as necessary. And then the output of this event is the increment will be reviewed and the product backlog would be updated. So these two, the first two ones, since they are already completed, so they will be removed on the product backlog. So it's already done. So, but since the third one, they are not yet completed, so the remaining task for this one goes back to the product backlog. Okay, so let's proceed on the day 10. So we already have the increment, we have the sprint review being done. So let's move on the day 10. So this is now our updated product backlog. So since the first one wasn't done, which is this one, which was we get that this one based from the previous slide that we had. So it was put back in the product backlog, and then the product owner determined that it has the top priority. So that's why we put it here on the top one. So this now takes the first precedence, and then requirements ready, then finalize guest list, finalized list of suppliers, and then if you can observe, we also have two items here that are added. So maybe because in the sprint review, they noticed that they were able to find the venue, but they don't have the color theme yet. So they were not able to pick that color for the theme of the wedding. So, and then they were able to find a venue with the catering, but they don't have the menu yet. So this just goes to show that how your product backlog is adaptive and dynamic. So depending on the results of the sprint review or the inspection. Okay, so finally, to conclude the sprint on day 10, the sprint retrospective takes place. This is now the perfect time when we plan ways to increase the quality and effectiveness. So the expected output for this one are the improvement points for the team. So maybe in the retrospective, the team came up with these two steps, or maybe um, having the shared drive so that they could store whatever documentation that they have, or maybe it's a matter of the team being very vocal about the impediments that they raise during the daily scrum, or yeah, as long as it's for the improvement of the team and not of the product, then that should be fine. Okay, so after the day 10, we go back again to the sprint planning, but this time we with this updated product backlog. So I hope that with this example that we have provided, all the terminologies that we've mentioned earlier, the Scrum team, the Scrum artifacts, and the Scrum events made sense now. Okay, and how each of the team plays as a crucial part in making the sprint happen. All right. So that's the example, the simulation part of the sprint, and I hope you really understand those. Let's now move on and let's proceed on the last agenda that we have. We have how to succeed with Scrum. So basically, for this one, we have the references, the training materials, and the certifications that we might be needing in Scrum. All right. So succeeding in Scrum is pretty easy as long as you know the theory behind it. Again, we have the empiricism and the lean thinking. And the three pillars are the transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So as long as you know the Scrum theory, you embody the different Scrum values, which are having the courage to do the right thing, being focused on your objective and the goals of the Scrum team, being committed to achieving the goals that you have set as a group, respect for your team, for your teammates, you can be capable, you're equally capable, you're equally independent. And then the last one, the openness for the work that you're doing and sharing transparency and being vocal about the challenges you encounter. So apart from knowing the theory, knowing the values, you should also keep in heart the Scrum components that we have. So again, we have the Scrum team. We have the three different roles. We have the product owner, the Scrum master, and the developers. We also have the three artifacts, which composes of the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. And then the Scrum events, which are the sprint planning, the daily Scrum, sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. So yeah, just a note, please note that I cannot take one element out of the equation at any given point in time because you'll not feel the full benefits of Scrum if you remove one component out of it. Okay? So yeah, apart from putting in mind and heart all of these concepts, if you wish to deepen your knowledge in Scrum, um, we can go more into detail by having these um, references and trainings. So for we have the Scrum Bible as we say. So we have the Scrum Guide, the 2020 version. So actually we have the old version 2017, but there are a lot of changes. So this is the latest version, the 2020 Scrum Guide. So you can have this link and download the Scrum Guide on that one. So I think it's just a few pages wherein you can read so that you can deepen your knowledge in Scrum. And also we have a lot of references and trainings available on the Udemy site. Uh, you may want to use this. So before conducting this presentation, I searched for the Agile Scrum in Udemy, and there are a lot of the search results wherein we have 3,524 results. So that just goes that to show the amount of material that you can explore just in case you wanted to assess if Agile Scrum works for your team. Okay, and then based from my experience, when I have my certifications in Scrum, I use the Udemy websites and the Scrum Guide. These references are really helpful in deepening my knowledge and passing the certifications that I have now. And then finally, if you really want to take everything on the next level, we have a lot of professional certifications which are available for you. We have the scrum.org. That is one of the most famous certifying bodies, but there are other certification bodies available as well. So you can take the professional exam for maybe Scrum Master role or being a product owner, for being a developer. And if you also want to facilitate trainings, you can also take the trainers, the certifications, and facilitation skills certification. Okay, so yeah, that concludes my presentation, and I hope that during this short amount of time, you have an idea of what Scrum is, what's the benefits are, what are the components, and how to succeed in Scrum, and make use the knowledge that you gain to assess whether Scrum is something that would work for you and your team. All right. So that ends my presentation. So let's proceed now on the knowledge check. I just wanted to incorporate this knowledge check for me as well to assess how effective am I as a presenter, and for you as well to check um, if you really observe something in Scrum. All right. So you may type in your answers on the chat box in the Microsoft Teams. So anyway, these are just 5 questions and it's very simple. So let's begin. So for the question number 1, we have Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps teams generate value through adaptive solutions to complex problem. So is it a true or a false? Okay, you may type your questions on the chat box. I can see a lot of you. Thank you for that. So the answer is true. All right. So question number 2. Scrum theory has 3 pillars, which are transparency, inspection, and blank. So what's the other Scrum theory that we have? Okay, so we have the adaptation. So many of you got the correct answer. All right, so question number 3, how many different roles are in a Scrum team? So we already provided here a few times mentioned on our presentation. All right, I can see 3 on the answers, and that's correct. We have the product owner, we have the Scrum Master role, and the developers as well. So thank you. And then the fourth question, which Scrum event focuses on planning ways to increase quality and effectiveness? Which Scrum event focuses on planning ways to increase quality and effectiveness? So you can just choose your answer on the 4 Scrum events that was mentioned earlier. Okay, so yeah, you got it right. Many got it right. So it's the retrospective, sprint retrospective meeting. And then the last one, Scrum can only be used in software development projects. Is it a true or a false? Okay, yeah, you got it right. It's false because Scrum is not mainly focused on the software development projects, but you can also use these and adapt on different approach and different things, right? As we discussed earlier on the presentation. Okay, so thank you for that and thank you for participating on the knowledge check. Okay, for at this point in time, I don't know if you still have time, but maybe yeah, the floor is open now for your questions and clarifications. Yeah, you just type in on the box. I can't see there is. Let me check. Yeah, as for we have here a question. Are there any books about Scrum or Agile recommended? So definitely we just have the um this one, the Scrum guide. So mainly this is the main reference or for the to deepen your knowledge on the Scrum. But for the book, I don't know if there is, but you may just use the Udemy websites. I can recommend those. I can also see how many certifications can one person take. Uh, it's up to you. For me, I did take 3 certifications for Scrum, Scrum Master role, product owner, and the professional Scrum with Kanban. So I already have 3. So it depends on you on how you are diligent in reviewing and your curiosity in taking the Scrum. How long does it take to be a Scrum Master? For this one, it is based on your experience. So just a tip, during I wanted to be a Scrum Master way back then. So what I did was to volunteer to facilitate the Scrum meetings. So maybe that's the first step. And then once you're comfortable with it, and then maybe you can volunteer on having the facilitation for the sprint retrospective. But keeping in mind, you need to have the technicalities. Maybe you can have your certifications first. So for you to be able to conduct effectively the sprint facilitations, so you know what are the do's and don'ts and the technical aspect of the Scrum. And then maybe if you're confident enough, then you can take those the Scrum Master role. You've mentioned earlier that there's an update in the Scrum guide. How do you relate that to the team? So yeah, it's not uh for the Scrum team. They are not really aware on the technicalities of the Scrum. So you being the Scrum Master, you guide them, right? So you should be have been updated on the Scrum rules, so you can really have the facilitation and guide them. And that's the uh, key characteristic of the Scrum Master, which is to guide and coach the Scrum team. So definitely by that you can coach the team. All right. I can see a lot of questions here, but it seems I can't read all of those. Maybe, yeah, you may also want to have your questions via LinkedIn. So just feel free to drop a message on my LinkedIn. So you can just search for my name, John Albert Gamboa, and yeah, maybe I can answer those questions. But yeah, I'm just being curious of the time. We still have a minute left for to end this session. Yeah, so that ends the session for this now. I hope you really learned something today, and always take care and have a nice day. So yeah, I need to have the floor get back to Surag. Surag.
So, thank you, John, first of all. So, Surag mentioned like he's having some issue, electricity issue or network issue. So, he asked me to join on behalf of him. So, it
Okay.
was a great session. I think there are a couple of questions which I have came through, like people are asking about the presentation that you have
Mhm,
given.
mhm.
So, maybe if you can share that, if possible, then we can share those to these people so that they can go through it after the session.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'm going to email this one to Surag.
Sure.
So then Surag maybe relay that this one to the attendees of the meeting.
Correct, correct, correct. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Uh,
All right.
I think it was great session. There are a lot of questions like you mentioned. So,
Mhm.
guys, either you can join our Discord channel or like you can mention, John mentioned, you can join him on LinkedIn so that both me and us and John, we can help you to solve your queries.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. All right.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think that's it. So thank you everyone. Thank you for joining this session. And always take care and have a nice day. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. Thank you. So, uh, the attendant people, I have shared the form link also again, the attendance form link. If you have not filled it, please go through it and fill it.